Hello, and welcome to your information session about pacing. My name is John Mackey, and I'm a pain specialist physiotherapist working in Manchester Foundation Trust. Pacing is a flexible, practical, and personalized approach to managing activity and exercise for people living with persistent pain. It aims to encourage people to become aware of their current activity patterns and how that affects their experience of pain. Rather than fighting or wrestling with your pain, it reminds us to complete daily activities while being mindful and respecting your capability. By making changes to how we do things, it may be possible to get more done, manage your flare-ups better, and have more control of your symptoms and activity levels, and even build on your activity or fitness goals. For others, it may be about learning to do a little less in the pursuit of better self-care. This in turn can allow for space to focus on things that you enjoy and add quality to your life. You may remember from your session about understanding pain that the pain system can be likened to an alarm designed to detect threat. Many factors can lead to the pain system becoming increasingly sensitive and producing more pain, and similarly, many factors can lead to it becoming less sensitive, such as improving your knowledge around your pain condition, aerobic exercise, using relaxation techniques, and pacing, to name but a few. Regularly performing amounts of activity that push our pain levels too high can be a way of maintaining a heightened sensitivity in the nervous system. When the background of sensitivity is high, people find there can be less space for activity. To this end, pacing helps people realize this relationship and at times do more and other times do less than they'd be naturally inclined to do. In this way, it makes space for activities that matter. And it may be helpful to consider some common cycles of activity that people living in persistent pain can notice. The boom and bust cycle of activity is often driven by activities based on pain levels. While this feels like a common sense approach, it comes with some difficulties. Take a moment to think about a time when you were performing an activity and in the end you realized you had done far too much. Perhaps you got a buzz from completing the activity, but you ended up in more pain. Perhaps you needed to take extended rest, or you used more pain relief than usual. Perhaps you had a bad night's sleep, or even had to take a few down days to help you recover. Rest could lead to less pain, but it may also come with a sense of frustration or other negative thoughts or emotions that will eventually lead to another burst of activity. Notice in the beginning of this graph that the person's activity levels, which are depicted by the black line, continues to rise until the activity feels no longer sustainable. The peak might represent activity over a relatively short period of time, such as doing a few hours of housework, but it may also be represented by a longer boom, such as working for weeks to meet pressured deadlines. The high levels of pain often lead to a person needing to stop the activity abruptly or having a crash or a flare-up after sustained periods of activity. Notice how the person swings between extremes of activity that increase their experience of pain on the one hand and the requirement for rest on the other. Over the longer term, the levels of activity reached may not be as high as previous occasions, and the subsequent periods of rest that follows could actually be longer, beginning to shift the overall direction of activity tolerance and pain experience in a negative direction. But of course, sometimes, as we all know, there can be positives of getting a job done despite the higher levels of pain, and that's our choice. If we look at a graph showing an example of well-paced activity, we don't see such extremes of highs and lows of activity. By reducing the duration and intensity of the activity period might mean that the person can avoid needing to take extended periods of rest and allow them to continue with the activity in a more sustainable way. It can be useful to reflect on an example of your own to consider the thoughts and the feelings you might have as the cycle unfolds through the peaks and the troughs of your own activity patterns. Perhaps after a flare-up or setback of your pain, you felt fearful of certain activities, or even avoidant, not wanting to experience that type of pain and suffering again. The fear avoidance cycle shows that fear of pain of causing more damage can lead to avoidance of an activity or types of movement that can lead to deconditioning of the body, therefore reinforcing the experience of pain. It may be that this fear of movement causes people to feel that they need to brace their muscles in order to keep themselves safe, causing more tension in the body and therefore pain. The experience of repeated painful episodes may continue to reinforce this cycle, affecting someone's motivation to carry on exercising or staying active. Take a moment to consider what effects the cycle might have on a person's physical health and well-being in the longer term. Take a moment to think about whether pacing could benefit you. Perhaps you've noticed that pain controls what you do and how much of it gets done. It could be affecting your performance at work, creating difficulties joining in family activities. You may be unable to plan ahead or make regular commitments. People around you may become unsure of your capabilities and so stop inviting you to join in. Frequent rest breaks and inactivity leads to deconditioning, which makes it harder to do activities in the longer term. And instead of a sense of achievement for your good days, you're punished by an increased pain following your activity. And this often drives low mood and frustration. People can find that through pacing their activities a little bit better, they can strike a better balance and begin to feel more in control. Consider this graph to examine how a person may avoid a spike in their activity and keep control of their pain. Imagine a person knows through trial and error that on an average day, they can tolerate sitting for about 20 minutes in relative comfort before it starts affecting their concentration. Stopping their activity to change their posture at this point allows them to take a short break before returning without a significant rise in their symptoms. A break here could consist of a rest or a short sequence of movement or exercise, or simply changing activity or position. If the person was to continue the task until their pain rose to uncomfortable levels, they may find it becomes very difficult to return to activity. They may need longer periods away from the task and even feel that they may need to use pain relief. So, to summarize, the key points here are the person chose to stop at a predetermined time, a short break consisting of changing activity or posture that allowed the person to return to their activity sooner and stay connected with the task. This allowed the person to avoid the peaks and troughs of the boom and bust cycle of activity. However, it's not always easy, and there are lots of reasons why we do things the way we do. It's interesting to reflect on any psychological and emotional influences on your decision-making when it comes to your approach. Sometimes completing activities gives us a feeling of achievement or excitement and can make us feel good about ourselves. Pay attention to any emotions you may be trying to seek and which may drive you to engage in activity for extended periods of time. You might also become aware of certain rules and standards you have, such as it's not worth doing a job unless I do it properly, or critical judgments such as I'm being a bad mother if I don't do X, Y, or Z. Be aware that many of us use activity and distraction as a coping mechanism for difficult emotional states. See if you can become interested in what emotions you may be trying to avoid by persevering in a particular way. So how can we begin to explore pacing? It can start with you working out your tolerance level for different tasks or activities. This is the block of time that you feel is acceptable to be engaged in a task before you take a break. Finding out what your capacity is for a particular task can be tricky, and likely only a rough estimate can be made at first. Through trial and error, and by noticing our successes and failures, we can reflect on them and change our approach when needed. In time, you'll become more accurate and better with these. So it might be helpful to use an example of walking. So if we think about Maria, she needs to walk 10 minutes to get to her local shop. She finds that on an average day, she can tolerate walking for about 5 minutes before her pain starts to rise, and by 10 minutes, she needs to stop for rest. She notices her pain becoming highly distressing at that point. She notices this pattern time and time again, and after learning about pacing, she tries an experiment. She sets her clock for 5-minute intervals. Each time she reaches this limit, she chooses to take a break whether she needs to or not, by sitting in a chair or leaning against a wall. By choosing to stop at 5 minutes, she can continue, and by using blocks of time instead of her pain as a guide, she can complete her shopping and return home, having done so with less distress. Once Maria trials this approach to ensure that it's right for her, she might be able to build her walking time slowly, changing a small amount over the next few months. On bad days, however, she has to adjust down her pacing to allow for her heightened sensitivity of her nervous system. So the key points here are, on an average day, she could perform activity for 5 minutes at a time. She took breaks whether she needed to or not, and she completed the task while keeping her pain levels in control. You might find it useful to start thinking about your own tolerance levels for different activities now that cause your pain to increase. This is something your pain management team member can get you started with. So let me leave you with some key points about practicing pacing in your own life. Consider using a weekly activity diary or schedule and plan your activities, spreading out the difficult tasks so that they're not all done in one go. When planning, consider the balance each day and across the week between activity and rest, and between your must-dos, which give a sense of necessity, and your would-like-to-dos, which perhaps offer more of a sense of pleasure or reward. This will help you prioritize your tasks. Try using frequent short breaks whilst remaining committed to the task at hand, without being too caught up in a sense of failure, frustration, loss, or guilt. Short breaks may mean taking rest, but they also may mean changing your activity or changing your posture to give specific muscles a rest. Doing this as habit and planned rather than always in response to your pain. It might also involve asking for help or delegating tasks. Try to resist the temptation to do a lot more on your better days, if possible. Consider your pacing clock for each activity of your plan. Work out your sensible limits of time for your various tasks and activity, and try your best to stick with them. Note your results and see if you can identify trends. By reflecting on the problems as well as the successes, you can make useful adjustments. And if you notice a lot of emotional drivers and difficulties when trying to pace things differently, consider what other strategies you might also need to help you respond to this helpfully. And remember, be patient. Making changes does take time. Thank you for listening, and good luck as you explore the benefits of pacing.